Tonight we will look at a cherished institution in American academic life, the Fulbright scholarships, what they've accomplished and where they're heading. And we'll also discuss the story of the late Senator J. William Fulbright, said to be the most influential foreign affairs voice in the 20th century. He helped to lead the battle against Senator Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism. He was the longest-serving chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He conducted the Vietnam hearings between 1996 and 1971, which changed the course of the war, certainly changed the course of public opinion in this country. Later, he was a mentor to Bill Clinton, who went to the University of Arkansas and then worked on the senator's staff. But we know Senator Fulbright best of all from the scholarships that he created in 1946. And it's still one of the greatest examples of people-to-people exchanges anywhere. But Bill Fulbright was also, according to his biographer, a racist. And his personal role in American foreign policy is not talked about a lot today. To discuss these various angles of the Fulbright scholarships and the man himself, we have John Bader, who is the executive director of the Fulbright Association, formerly the dean and head of the Fulbright program at the Johns Hopkins. He did a Fulbright in India, and we'll talk about Fulbright the man and Fulbright the program, sort of the view from 30,000 feet. Then I'll ask Brian Souders, and they're both doctors, I should say, PhDs, who administers the program at UMBC, to give us a ground level view of how the program runs today and how it's changing, how it's changed and how it's changing. His Fulbright was as a postgrad in Estonia, but his passion was about all things Russian. So first I'll turn the microphone over to John Bader. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Can you all hear me all right? I'm delighted to be here, and I'm so grateful to the Council for this invitation and the opportunity to bring together our respective communities. The Fulbright alumni community, there are about 900 Fulbrighters in the state of Maryland. There are roughly 60,000 Fulbrighters in the United States. Hundreds of thousands if you count alumni across the world. But it's very nice to be here and to think about the ways that our communities can come together and find some joint programming opportunities and so on. So I'm excited to be part of this conversation. As Roy mentioned, this is also something of a homecoming for me. I used to work on the Homewood campus just up the street for Johns Hopkins, an institution I love that taught me so much and gave so many great opportunities to my career. It is fabulous to be in this building and looking out over one of America's great cities. So thank you for including me. As Roy suggests, my remarks will focus a bit on the history of the program as a kind of preliminary to Brian's talk about what's happening now. We very much want this to be a conversation, a set of discussions, so think about questions that you might have as we go along. First, I want to start with Senator Fulbright and his experience at Oxford in the 1920s when he was a Rhodes Scholar. This is a young man who basically grew up on the campus of the University of Arkansas. He went to elementary school on the campus, he went to high school on the campus, he went to college on the campus. Basically his entire life defined by this important institution in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And so when he went to Oxford, this was the first time he had been overseas, and it was there that he began to understand the power of person-to-person exchanges and the opportunities, both personally and academically, that those would allow. When he, in the aftermath of the Second World War, he reflected on this particular the power of this kind of exchange, and that is the origin of the concept of the Fulbright exchange program. So in this case, he thought about how to, in the rubble, literal rubble of the Second World War, how could we find ways to cooperate with each other and get to know each other better, with the idea that we're less likely to kill each other if we know each other, right? It's a basic concept of diplomacy. So Bill Fulbright said, okay, well, how could this be done, and how could it be done on a massive scale? It's, the Rhodes Scholarship is a very small program relatively, right? Only about 32 Americans go to Oxford. There are Rhodes Scholars come from other countries, to be sure, but the scale is small, and Bill Fulbright's vision was much grander than that. So he said, all right, well, how could we do this? And through a very simple act of legislation in which the funding would come from debt, wartime debts owed to the United States, they would basically work out a funding mechanism to pay for international exchanges to multiple countries, not just to one campus in one country. The trajectory, if you sort of move forward through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, is that went from just a handful of countries to now 162 countries involved in the Fulbright program, meaning that Americans go to 162 countries, and scholars and students from those 162 countries come here to the United States to study. It is often the case that when we think about Fulbrighters, we think of Americans going overseas to teach and research, when in fact more than half of grantees are foreign scholars and students here, who have come here. And they come here to teach, to study, to help us learn languages that we wouldn't otherwise be able to learn. So that's an important trajectory as you think about that over time, and also to think about the ways in which it is handled diplomatically. Now, in the case of 49 of these 162 countries, there are Fulbright commissions in country. And these are created as a result of bilateral relationships and agreements between, say, the United States and Indonesia, the United States and Poland, the United States and Brazil, for example. Each of these countries then have a commission. It's made up of Americans and those in that country, typically from the academic community. And their job is to basically to administer this program and to be a liaison to the local government. So in the case of the Netherlands, okay, so in this case, the Dutch have put together this particular program. They have their scholars going to the United States and back to the Netherlands. And they find funding both from the United States government and from the Dutch government. So there are sources of funding to pay for this as they go. So it's important that you understand that this is a very complicated set of diplomatic relationships, financial relationships. There are private entities involved in this, not only universities, but donors. It's a very complicated ecosystem. And as a result, that can create both opportunity and confusion. The opportunity is that the program is very dynamic, it's very innovative, it relies on individuals and their relationships to grow and build over time. But there is also some confusion about who is doing what at any given time and who is responsible for the program itself. In fact, the governance of the program has complexities. I won't go too far into this, but it started with the idea that the academic community would basically be in charge of the Fulbright program. They created basically an oversight board made up primarily of academics, college presidents, professors, and the like. And it was extremely independent for a long time, primarily housed at the U.S. Information Agency, and sort of kept apart from the mechanisms of policy and the ideas of priorities of a given administration. Well, that began to shift in the 70s and 80s, and in fact, at that point, they shifted the program from being housed at USIA into the State Department. And it was that moment that it became part of what is known as public diplomacy. All of you are familiar with that term. It's a problematic term because, of course, it suggests that those of us who are publicly involved, the average person, can have a role to play in making the world a better place, in being a citizen ambassador. However, there could be pressure to speak on behalf of the United States and to be an instrument of U.S. foreign policy, which is not what Fulbrighters are accustomed to, and it has been a tension within the program for some time. We can, if that's of interest to you, we can dig into this more later. So I think this gives you a kind of an institutional historic sense of where the program has come from, its idea of empowering all of us to make the world a better place, but having some complexities politically. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Brian, who's going to talk about how this program works right now and some of the challenges that they're facing in terms of recruitment and so on. And then we will open up the conversation for questions. There are other points to be made, but I appreciate the chance to chat with you this evening. And now my friend Brian.
Good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Brian Souders. I have the long and impenetrable title of I am the Associate Director of Global Learning in the Center for Global Engagement at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And then when I take a deep breath and say, what does that mean? And I will then follow up and say, have you heard of the Fulbright program? Yes, I'm the Fulbright guy. So, and that is a role that I've had at UMBC now for the past 14 years. So I want to thank you all for especially thanking Roy for inviting me here this evening to talk about what we've been doing at UMBC, but also to talk about what the Fulbright program looks like now at the university level. So I have two interesting roles at UMBC in that I work with both the student side of the program and the faculty side of the program. So I get to coach our undergraduate, currently enrolled graduate students, and recent alumni through the application process. And then I get to also work with faculty members as they're thinking about their own Fulbright awards. The processes look very different, but the way that I am working to meet what it is that the Fulbright program is looking for is relatively similar. So one of the things, so again, in the 14 years that I've had this role, I've grown a program from something that was given to me as I was simultaneously running our study abroad office to something that has now become my full-time job, and a job that I absolutely love and feel blessed to have most every single day, most days. But one of the things, though, that the Fulbright program now currently is looking to do is making certain that the representatives of the United States heading to who are applying for and hopefully receiving these awards look like the United States of 2024. Historically, Fulbright programs tended to draw from elite institutions in the United States, from small private liberal arts schools, the large land-grant universities throughout the country. In approximately 30 years ago, Fulbright became very aware of the following: that might not necessarily be the most representative side of the United States that we can present to the world in that role of public diplomacy that John was talking about. So as such, Fulbright has implemented multiple ways of trying to increase that diversity of institutions and increase the diversity of applicants. So one of the things that Fulbright has done is taken a very, very broad view of what it means by diversity. So I have read their diversity statement when they give us our publicity slides every year. It's like, well, maybe the 20-year-olds can read that. I can't. But it takes a very broad view of diversity and making sure that every student feels that they are welcome as part of the overall Fulbright program, and the same with the faculty as well. It has also worked very, very hard to train individuals at institutions that have not traditionally sent many students or feel that Fulbrights really aren't for them. I love the motto, and I wish I could claim it as my own. I don't. I can't. But Fulbright has told us to say, Fulbright is elite, but it is not elitist. It is very much a democratic scholarship for any qualified applicant at any university across the United States. So what, for me, is great, I mean, I work at UMBC. And as you probably know, our campus is an incredibly diverse and wonderful place where all students of all races and ethnicities can feel welcome. So I have loved working there for the past 23 years. It's been a tremendous honor. One of the things that I have worked to do, though, over that time is to make sure that our applicants for the program actually do feel like it is for them. And now in my new role that I have, as it is my only job that I have, it allows me to reach out to all of the communities across campus. And by that I mean of our multiple scholar programs that are for the humanities, social sciences, which historically have been most of our awardees, but also they're like, we want STEM students. We want students in the STEM fields because they can do the kinds of laboratory-based work that they can do absolutely anywhere in the world. So, of course, because we are the home of the Meyerhoff Scholar Program, it does mean that now that we are part of the partnership with them, we are able to draw from that applicant pool. Other things that they've done is, of course, expanded aspects of the student program. Historically, the program was basically for, you will go do research for a year overseas. And that is great for students who have done undergraduate research, but maybe not everyone has done that. What used to be a tiny niche program was the English Teaching Assistant Program. So, which, if I remember correctly, it was in, I think, 3 countries. It started in Germany, France, and one other country that I can't remember off the top of my head. So a very tiny program. It is now actually the larger part of the Fulbright program. And if we're thinking about the Fulbright in terms of public diplomacy, it's ideal because you are getting enthusiastic young Americans into classroom settings from the primary and secondary level all the way through university levels to serve as a conversation partner and a living, breathing American, and in many cases, the first American that many students in the host countries have ever actually met. So if we want to think of the long-lasting power of public diplomacy, these ETAs are that. So it also gives students who might not necessarily consider themselves as researchers, or students who might not, who would never have thought of the programs, like, oh yeah, but I've done tutoring. Perfect, this opportunity is for you. So Fulbright has changed with the time at the student level, and that has been a blessing to be able to work with. The things that I do in my day job, though, it does make it quite interesting. So because I am trying to recruit students who might not necessarily be able to picture themselves as a Fulbrighter. So the work that I've done over the past years at UMBC's campus, though, and especially working with first-generation Americans, with first-generation college students, with our LGBT students, with students of all the kinds of diversity that we have on our campus, to actually say, well, you know, here are some of the Fulbright, here are some of our alumni who are like you. And so I want you to have a conversation with them. I can talk about the program and I can advise you, but I want you to talk to our students who have had this experience, and that way you can actually picture yourself. Some of the other challenges that we've had over the past few years, though, in working with this program is that students, I'm going to be diplomatic. So our students are fantastic, and sometimes some students need a bit more coaching than others, and that's fine. That is my job, and I love my job. So, but sometimes I spend some of my time acting almost as a counselor to help them actually understand that, no, really, this is an opportunity for you, and you are an ideal candidate for that. I always say that if I have a student who is standing in my door saying, I can't do this, and is about to burst into tears, I don't make them cry, really, saying that this is too much for me, and I say, this is exactly, you are going to be, I can tell that you're going to be a Fulbrighter, and 90% of the times they actually do get the awards. So other things that have been challenging, of course, the pandemic. So it has made recruiting much more challenging. I think we are at least bouncing back from that at UMBC, and my colleagues at other institutions across the country have said the same thing, that that students seemed at one point relatively unwilling to, I'm going to put all this work into this application, when they heard of their friends a year before who'd put all the work into the application, gotten the award, and had their awards canceled because they physically could not travel. So that was hard. I think, I'm crossing my fingers, that we are past that point within on the student side of the program. And I'm looking forward, as I'm about to start the recruiting season for the 25-26 application cycle, that it's going to be a banner year like it was this past year. We had our second, at UMBC, we had our second highest class of applicants this year, the second highest class of people whose applications are already overseas in the review process. And we already have one winner. So a recipient, a young lady who is a first-generation immigrant from, her parents came from Guinea in West Africa, and she's doing cancer research in France. So again, I just want to thank you all for your time, and we are happy to answer any questions that you've got. Again, this is a fun conversation about a program that we are passionate about. So thank you, everybody.
There's been, I gather from the website of UMBC, quite an expansion in the time you've been in charge of the program and the applicants and the winners. Could you just give us the statistics or just the numbers?
Thank you. You want to? So I am happy to do so, and I do so regularly to anybody who asks me on campus. Fulbright in the past few years has, and I'm trying to remember when it actually started, and I'm going to look at you, John, like you might remember.
1946.
No, not the 46, when they started the top producing index. So
about 30 years ago.
30? That long? Okay, that wasn't, because we weren't on the radar screen at that point. So when I first started with the program, I had 4 applicants in the 2010-2011 cycle. And 3 of them got it. It's like, oh, this is easy. No, it's not. We happen to have amazing students at that point. So at UMBC, for 3 of the past 5 years, we have been named a top producing institution. Because we are a doctoral granting institution, that means that we need to have at least 10 recipients in order to be called a top producing institution. So one year we had 13, one year we had 11, this past year we had 10. I do
These
also.
are accepted?
These are accepted who get on planes and go places. Wow. So, yeah. I will give a slight comparison. There is a large public university about 35 miles that way, so with 3 times our enrollment. The year that we got 13, they had 14. Our students are amazing. So it's been fun to work with them. So, and they actually make it easy.
Well, that's really impressive. So of the applicants and of the winners, does anybody ever ask you about Fulbright the man?
I have had that once. And sometimes I did have a student once several years ago ask me, how do you feel about that legacy, the fact that he was his challenging history? And I say, well, there are many things in this country that have challenging histories. And if we can't talk about them and ask about them and discuss them openly, then what kind of society do we live in? And that's a similar kind of question that you as a representative of the United States will get. You will get challenging questions, and you need to have an answer to be able to talk about them. So
what is your answer?
What's my answer?
Yes, if somebody asks you, Bill Fulbright the man, is he a good role model? Somebody could ask that question. What would you say?
I would say that human beings are complicated and times change, and I'm very glad that we live in a different time now than we did when such attitudes were accepted. So, okay. I'm glad to live in 2024.
So John, maybe this sort of is a way of just opening up the subject of the man himself. Was he really a racist? Did he lead the filibusters against the Civil Rights Act? Was he in the KKK? I mean, that was a rumor. I don't think it's true, but what do you say about that?
These are important questions because we need, as Brian is suggesting, to have good answers, and we need to have an intelligent, informed dialogue about this. I would offer you a couple of thoughts. The first was that Bill Fulbright was a pragmatist. I'm not sure that there is good evidence that he was a racist. In fact, I would dispute that contention. I'm not sure that his biographers had much to go on in terms of statements against black people, for example. He lived in a racist state. He represented many racists. And that's a very problematic position to be in if you want to be reelected. This is one of the problems in the United States historically and today. The question is, do you want to reflect the better angels of your constituents, or are you simply pragmatically reflecting their value systems? Fulbright basically said that there's no way that I could be reelected if I were to support the civil rights movement, the Civil Rights Act. That's all the good things that I do for the world and for this country, I would not be able to do if I were voted out of office. That's not a particularly comfortable position. It's not a very courageous position. So to think of him as a great man, first of all, I actually don't like that term, and I think we're discovering that's a problematic term to begin with, to label some in that sense, because as Martin Luther would tell you, we are all sinners, and the question is how can you kind of put it on the balance sheet in a way that's reflective. I will say that what I've just said is biased, and I'll share why it's biased. My dad worked for Bill Fulbright. The very hearings that Roy made reference to for investigating particularly the Tonkin Gulf incident were staffed by my dad. And it was one of the greatest periods of my dad's career to work shoulder to shoulder with one of the great internationalists in American history. My mother, who was a very accomplished sculptor, sculpted the senator. So my mom is the senator's portrait artist, and my dad worked for the senator. So where do you think I'm going to stand on this? So just for the sake of transparency, and the Fulbright program has defined two generations of my family. My dad was a Fulbrighter in the first class to West Germany. My parents got married while my dad was on that Fulbright in Munich. And then you know the rest of the history. And I went to India on my Fulbright. So we are a Fulbright family. I'm practically out of central casting when it comes to running the Alumni Association. But it also means that I have difficulty answering this question in a way that another might be much more critical of the senator.
So we could say you're a son of the Fulbright.
You could say that.
In a sense. Did Senator Fulbright lead or participate or follow in the questioning of McCarthy? I've read different things, and I wasn't even aware of it, frankly, until I read up.
Yeah, Bill Fulbright was an enemy of Joe McCarthy. There's no doubt about it. And in fact, Joe McCarthy was inclined and often called Senator Fulbright half-bright. Joe McCarthy basically was one of the original ugly politicians of the United States. And Bill Fulbright, who was a patrician and dignified and had a lot of integrity, although you could make the argument that he did not on racial issues, found Joe McCarthy to be extremely offensive. It is also ironic in his relationship with Lyndon Johnson, if you don't mind me bringing that in.
Please do, because Johnson and Fulbright had quite a falling out, and I gather it hurt the Fulbright program.
It sure did. So these were both accomplished Southern Democratic senators, right? Lyndon Johnson from Texas, Bill Fulbright from Arkansas. They basically came up at the same time. They were contemporaries, peers, friends, and yet they diverged in two very important ways. First, Lyndon Johnson was an important partner with Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders during the Great Society to bring forward revolutionary legislation on civil rights. And it was just noted that Bill Fulbright was an opponent of those efforts. He basically co-authored the Southern Manifesto, which was an effort to try to slow down desegregation in very serious ways. And yet they had the opposite situation when it came to Vietnam. So of course, Lyndon Johnson found himself completely sucked into the dynamic of the commitment to the war in Southeast Asia, and Bill Fulbright began to think that this was not advancing American interests and was beginning to unravel. It is also coincidental that just 2 nights ago, I was at the Austrian embassy and met the daughter of Lyndon Johnson. And we had a chat about her dad and Fulbright. And when I mentioned the word Fulbright, she got almost upset because Roy is exactly right. This is one of the most important friendships in the U.S. Senate in its history. And these two men started going at it in the late 60s. And again, as you've suggested, funding for the program reached its peak in about 1965 in real terms and took a dive because Lyndon Johnson was angry with Bill Fulbright. So sometimes politics can be ugly and personal and involve betrayal and disappointment that is very human.
What did the Fulbright hearings on Vietnam accomplish? Obviously, they changed public opinion, but what did he bring out, and how did he run them?
So these were a long series of conversations with important witnesses on what was happening in Vietnam and whether it was legitimate. The piece that I'm most familiar with was the hearings around the Tonkin Gulf incident. And for those of you who remember the history of this period, you'll know that there was a series of military actions that took place in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is obviously part of Vietnam, in which the U.S. Navy contended that they had been fired upon by Vietnamese forces. This happened in 1964, I want to say. And that led rather quickly, under Johnson's leadership, to the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which was adopted by Congress and effectively gave the administration not quite carte blanche, but legislative authority to escalate the war. Sometime after that, Bill Fulbright started digging into this, and this is where my dad's background as a naval intelligence officer became germane, because he basically figured out that what the U.S. Navy was describing happened, at least on one of the two incidents, could not have happened. It was basically not physically or militarily possible. So in effect, and in fact this is the case, they invented this as a way to create an excuse to escalate in the war. This is why you always have to be skeptical of politicians when they tell you, this is why we're going to war. Oh, there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We need to do something about that. One of the reasons why we have the higher ed system that we have at UMBC and other places is to create a skeptical polity. So be skeptical. In this case, that skepticism was merited.
So what really happened to Tonkin? Do we know now? I mean, has anybody really gotten to the bottom of it? Has anybody been ever held responsible for misleading the public?
That's a good question. I wish I could tell you more on this, but I do know it has been, the scholarship on this has been extraordinary, and you should read more about it.
Did Bill Fulbright give a green light to the building of the Berlin Wall? This is from Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Which is not always a airtight source, but still.
No, there is rumor that he said, well, then go ahead and put up a wall, and he meant it rhetorically, or he was joking. I mean, there are rumors about this. It's hard to say, but I will say that what is very interesting about Bill Fulbright's legacy now, if you don't mind me transitioning to that,
Please.
is that today's politicians, today's State Department, struggles with this legacy. And there are debates within our community which are quite animated about the degree to which Bill Fulbright's name, image, history should be presented. To the point that only one student has asked you about this. In fact, Bill Fulbright was one of the most famous American politicians in the 60s and 70s. He wrote extraordinary books that were widely read.
The Arrogance of Power.
The Arrogance of Power, for example. He was one of the most talented, extraordinary writers in American political history, maybe rivaled only by Teddy Roosevelt and Jefferson and a handful of people. His prose is extraordinary. His speeches were always thoughtful. This is why there's this clash between that kind of personality and charisma and this conflicted legacy. So I think maybe we can shift back to talking about the Fulbright program itself, but it is a fascinating history. It is worth your investigation. It is worth continued thought.
Is the fact that he's somewhat been airbrushed from the history and he's no longer talked about that much, is this a result of one of those trends called either cancel culture or wokeness or something else? How do you fit that into contemporary American discussion?
Well, and I think of this broadly about many of the prestigious scholarships that have a name attached to them. I would argue, I mean, there's a even more robust discussion about Cecil Rhodes, the founder of the Rhodes Scholarship, and his legacy, not just in the, in the places where he was the colonial overlord, along in the United States and also in the United Kingdom. And within those of us who manage these scholarship programs on campus, we absolutely, especially the Rhodes advisors, tend to talk a great deal about that very complicated legacy. And should I consider this as something that I want to consider as a scholarship that I would want to apply for? Would I feel comfortable being part of that? My argument with that is, although I don't manage the Rhodes program at UMBC, but I would say, you can't be part of the conversation if you're outside. You have to be inside, having the conversation, having those dialogues, having that discussion.
And this may also be a matter of redemption. I mean, if you think about Alfred Nobel, those awards were basically created to redeem him.
Right.
Having, invented dynamite? Or, yeah. So these were problematic men of violence and coercion. And so the question is, how do you redeem yourself? I mean, again, this is part of God's grace. It's part of our ability to forgive each other, to find the good in what we have done, and to move forward. I can tell you this, that the word Fulbright around this world is very powerful. And I had a conversation, for example, with a young woman who was from Tunisia. She was studying at Georgia Tech. And she said, in my country, Fulbright means hope. And why does it do that? Well, that's because hundreds of thousands of young people have come to this country to be taught in ways that they could never have done in their own country. If you want to be a civil engineer and you live in Libya or Tunisia or Uganda, you got to come here. If you want to build bridges, literally build bridges in Indonesia, you're probably going to need to go to Georgia Tech or to University of Maryland or any number of engineering schools here in the United States. You're going to need funding to do that because there's no way that you could pay for that yourself. So therefore, isn't this a good way to redeem who you are and the sins that you have committed? I would say yeah.
Well, I hadn't expected the conversation to go quite to this degree of moral discussion, but it's appropriate because he really is a complex figure and a great figure. Yeah, so we'll start with questions. I'll put the microphone up there in a second, but maybe I could ask you one last question just about your father's relationship with Fulbright. When he would come home at night, let's say, after a day of hearings or just an investigation, what would he say about Fulbright?
Well, let's remember that when he was coming home, I was about 5 years old. So born in 1963. I can't really comment on that all that well. I do know that everyone who worked with Bill Fulbright was deeply loyal to him and very fond of their time together. My dad's life was really animated by this relationship. It's an honor to be part of that legacy.
Let's go to questions.
Do many of the Fulbright scholars end up being in careers that involve political or national government leadership? And can you mention maybe the top 5 or 6 most famous Fulbright scholars that people in this room might have heard of?
My first name is John, so I'm thinking John Steinbeck, John Lithgow, the King of Spain.
The current
Juan. His name is Juan too. So everybody's named John.
I was thinking the current Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
That's exactly right. So there have been in the history of the program 42 heads of state who are Fulbrighters. You cannot actually count the number of ministers. For example, most of the ministers in power in Vietnam, isn't that ironic, are Fulbrighters. Absolutely. In fact, there is a university named for Bill Fulbright in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City. Yeah. One of the things I thought I would also say is that the scale of this is quite exceptional. Brian is part of a network of Fulbright program advisors who are coaching and helping what totals 4,000 outbound Fulbrighters every year.
Wow.
4,000. Okay, so that's by a factor of more than 100, obviously larger than the Rhodes program. So you think, well, and of course that scale is necessary to have the reach, both in terms of 162 countries and the kinds of diversity that we experience. But it's quite a history.
Thanks, impressive.
A couple of questions from our virtual audience. The first is from one of our trustees of the council. His question is this: do you represent UMBC students, or do you also represent students from other local colleges and universities?
That is an excellent question, so thank you. I work with UMBC students only, and it's not because it is because each university has an individual like me, a Fulbright program advisor, whose job it is to work with students, so at that institution. And that could be either currently enrolled students or recent alumni of that institution. So sometimes it is a full-time person like me where this is, well, one of several things that I do working with scholarships. But at some other institutions, it might be a faculty member who has this tasked as part of their as their employment at that institution. But this network is, there are thousands of us across the country who have experience of coaching our students through the program.
Thank you very much. Another question from one of our virtual attendees is this. How many years is a Fulbright scholar overseas? Do they get an advanced degree? What are the expectations of them?
Interesting. And my favorite answer with all things Fulbright, it depends. Those of us who work with it are always, because that's almost always the exact question, I get multiple versions of that question. And it's like, it really depends on the country you're going to. The majority of our students will have a grant for 1 academic year. So if you were doing a teaching award, is the academic calendar of the host country. If you were doing a research award, usually 9 to 10 months. There are, and part of the expansion of the program as well, is into degree-seeking programs. And so that means that students could spend 1 year if it's a master's degree in the United Kingdom. If you are doing a doctoral program, then it could be 3 years in that host country. The expectations will entirely depend upon what it is that the individual is doing. And if they're doing a research project, for example, it could be work towards their dissertation. It could be, but alternately, I've had students who've just done a project that they have found interesting and that they then go on and do whatever it is that is happening next in their career. Sometimes they take that work into a future doctoral program, a future master's program. So it just depends upon what it is that the student is interested in doing with it.
On the inbound side, it is much more common for there to be multi-year grants because they want to complete an entire master's program in engineering, for example, and that may take 3 years.
When you say inbound, could you explain?
Oh, that would be foreign scholars and students coming to the United States. So Brian's quite right that for the most part, outbound Americans are out for 1 year. There are exceptions, as you've noted. It's also worth noting that the faculty program, there are actually a variety of Fulbright programs under this. So most people think of the student program, which is what I did to India, but the scholar program varies enormously in length. So you could actually be a scholar in residence in France or Italy or wherever for 3 months or 6 months. Actually, one of the biggest problems is, say, for faculty at UMBC, is that their provost doesn't want to let them go. They're like, wait a minute, who's going to teach when you're gone? And there is no good answer to that, and there's no funding to help pay for the person who would fill in for you. In fact, there's not really enough funding anyway to pay for what you're about to do. Which is another political question, which is the effect of 12 years of flat funding, which I can get into today's advocacy role that we play at the association to get more money for Fulbright. But that can be another question.
Speaking of funding, what is the source of funding for a UMBC student?
Well, for a UMBC student, I'm
same
here.
as everyone, yeah.
It would be the same for everybody. So the Fulbright program is an appropriated program. It is funded. There is no foundation. People say, "Oh, you run the foundation." I do not run the foundation. There is no foundation to run. For example, the Harry Truman, the Truman Scholarship, is funded by an endowed foundation. That was the memorial for Harry Truman. They put in enough money. The U.S. government put enough money for it to actually run on its own interest. And that's not the case for Fulbright. So Fulbright is appropriated at about the tune right now of $287.5 million a year.
By the U.S. Congress?
By the U.S. Congress, right, which is one of the roles that I play. I'm basically the chief advocate to the U.S. Congress for funding for the scholarship. And again, we could talk about advocacy if you care to. Another roughly $100 million goes into bilateral pools, respectively, by those 49 commission countries that I referred to before. This is one of those rare U.S. government programs. I can only think of NATO, to be honest, as another example of how U.S. funding is actually leveraged by foreign funding.
Can I follow up on that? Sorry, so are these tax dollars that's funding it? You said earlier. This is
Tax dollars.
They're tax dollars. Okay.
Good question. So it started off being funded by foreign debt, and by roughly the early 60s, that money ran out. And a new legislation created a new mechanism for funding it, and that's basically annual appropriations. It is found, technically, within the state and foreign operations appropriations. There are 12 appropriations bills, theoretically. That never happens. And this is embedded in that, and that's how it's funded.
Hello, my name is Bishop Harley, and I'm a local minister in Baltimore. I have a question, and then I have a suggestion, if you will.
Go ahead.
And the question is, when these students receive these scholarships, and say like they're going somewhere, Oxford, somewhere, England, whatever, are they expected to stay there the whole full 2, 3, 4 years of their term, or do you all fly them back to their origin state or country for reprieve, like the holiday? That's question number one. Question number two, I'm asked that you forgive me. And that is, one thing about Americans, we are big on redemption. And you cannot, and I'm assume that you're evangelical, you cannot take sin and put it under the rug and then blame it on woke. Just hear me out.
Blame it on what?
You cannot take sin and put it under the rug. And I'm bringing up sin because you keep bringing up these characteristics about Christianity. And one of the things that my white brothers and sisters have to remember about racism, you can't keep tapping out when it's convenient. Just as my brother said earlier, there would have been a time where he would not have been accepted because our narrative about things are narrow. And so one of the things about Americans, they love redemption stories, that I did ABC. And I'm gonna give you an example. If a black man walking down the street, policies are against him, he has no way out. He decides to sell drugs. But in his heart, he's not a drug dealer. I'm just trying to make ends meet with the family. And regardless of not if he does that or not, one would say, you have another option. You have another way. So even with racism, I don't care if it was 60 years ago, 30 years ago, you have an option. And if you choose to take the wrong door for your benefit, then you don't know when that debt is coming in. You don't know when that payment is coming in. So my suggestion to you all, when people ask you questions about Fulbright, was he a racist? And just by his stance against civil rights, you would have to say yes. But here are the things that he has done to redeem himself. And I'm going back because I'm assuming you're evangelical, just like when David took Bathsheba, Uriah's wife. He said, my sin is ever before me. And I'm not trying to turn this religious. He didn't hide it, but it became a benefit about the beauty of redemption and restoration. So with young people today, they smart. And so with African Americans who read the history of someone that's going to give them a scholarship, it's not that they woke, it's that they are intelligent. So in other words, Fulbright, yes, in my opinion, he was a racist because he chose that door. But he's redeeming himself by giving humanity these scholarships, these wonderful opportunity for growth. So in my humble suggestion, as y'all struggle to say that, just say what it was, and here's the path that he took to redeem himself and find himself in favor with God. because that spinoff is a tap out. And that's the benefit of some, no offense, of my white brothers and sisters. You could tap out when you want to because you don't have to live that experience. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if I offended you in some way, that's
Oh,
not
no,
what
no, not at all.
I don't mean to offend you, but I think we need to grow up and stop tapping out.
No, but this
It
is-
is what it is. It doesn't make him a bad person because he chose that door. He probably had no option. But because he chose that door, and you speak in evangelicalism, he chose the wrong door. But it's a benefit today, but we still have to acknowledge, because a little fly in the ointment disturbs the oil. That's just my comment.
I want to thank you for that. Absolutely, absolutely. No, and this is in fact what I was looking forward to this evening, was a comment just like this. And I really respect what you're saying, and I appreciate it.
Let me, please,
Bishop-
don't forgive me. It's just like in South Africa. South Africa did not finish its apartheid because people changed their attitudes. They finished their apartheid because it became expensive. Not because people got over it, not because the ideas were gone away and suddenly there was some deliverance. Even the church is adjusting to LGBTQ because they see the value of people. And we got to repent on how we treated these people. So my humble suggestion, if you could take some notes from what I just said and you talk to people, say, you know what, he was this, but look what the power of God has done. That grabs the heart of a person, like, I can change, but let's not tap out because it is what it is.
Bishop, I'd like to say again, thanks for your words and your thoughts, and I think they really do help tie up the evening very well. I do want to encourage any Fulbright graduates, if you have something to say about what happened to you on your Fulbright, we have a few minutes left. Everybody I talk to, including my own daughter, who went to China, says that a Fulbright is a life-changing event. And if somebody has just a brief anecdote, we would welcome it. Let's go to the next question.
I have a much more mundane question or comment, and that is the mechanics of the program. So I'm a student who walks into Brian's office, and I said, tell me about the Fulbright program. Do I get a stipend? Do I get the travel expenses that Bishop mentioned? What is entailed? What are students expected to provide other than themselves and their scholarship or their studies?
So, excellent question. Easy. So everybody gets, so I can just sort of speak at a blanket of what the benefits of the program are. Everyone gets round trip airfare to wherever it is that they are going. So they get there, they get to come home. They get health insurance for the time that they are overseas. I say, you can get sick. Please don't, but you can. You will get a viable scholarship, a stipend amount that will cover your expenses while you're there. I tell my students you'll have a nice graduate student stipend while you are there. You will not get rich, but you will not be providing your own funds for this. There are enhancement opportunities throughout the course of the time that you will be there because you'll be working with the Fulbright Commission of the host country or with the U.S. Embassy. And the biggest thing is and you get to be a Fulbrighter for life. So, which is kind of a big deal. At UMBC, so the mechanics of the program, I run, it's a lot of one-on-one advising of saying, well, what is it that you want to do? And is that a realistic option given what the host country is looking for? And sort of almost a matching of your interest and the skills that they're looking for in various programs. Because each program is looking for actually very different things. I like to think of the country profiles that they have, the list of all the places that students can do work is it's basically a job description and making sure that you match what they are looking for.
So quick follow-up, and,
Sure.
and then I'll let it go. But does a prospective candidate choose a country first and then figure out what they want to do, or do they figure out what they want to do and then the country follows that?
I'm going to give the Fulbright answer.
It depends.
So in that sometimes students will come with specific research ideas and I could really do this anywhere. If it's a student who is doing something that our colleagues in STEM do, I'm a social scientist. I don't know what they're doing. I have literally no idea. However, I was like, well, they could do it in multiple countries. And I say, you may wish to, talk to your faculty and see where they have individuals who they collaborate with and find what's going to be the best fit there. Alternately, sometimes students will say, I want to go to Finland, which is always my dream because I did my original study abroad in Finland, and then I will sit there and wax poetic about Finland for the next hour, and then eventually they'll be able to get something in edgewise. So it really just depends. So, but
Thank you.
Sure.
It's also, if I don't, it's also kind of, ultimately, it doesn't really matter. So just a quick story. I went, because I'm an alum of the India program, I went to a briefing of outbound students and scholars to India, and they were talking at great length about the research projects they were going to do and whether they needed translators or not. And they went on and on. At one point, I just had to raise my hand and say, actually, what really matters are the people that you're going to meet, the friendships that you're going to form. The way that you're going to learn about this country and how you're going to teach others about our country, as complicated as it is, you are, in effect, an ambassador of yourself, of your family, of who you are. You don't have to speak on behalf of the United States. But remember your role here. So in a way, the projects that are crafted, and I did the same job that Brian did at Johns Hopkins for 10 years. It's basically to give you something to do while you build those relationships.
Yeah, just to share a couple experiences. I was a Fulbright specialist with the Norwegian Ministry of Defense in both 2018 and 2022. And just to kind of underscore the value of the relationships, I'm very good friends with my sponsors, a gentleman by the name of Tom Roseth. He's probably the foremost expert in the world right now on Ukraine and the crisis going on there. Collectively, as a result of the first project, we co-edited a book together in 2020. We brought together authors from both Europe and North America and published this compendium of pieces on intelligence relations and dealing with global security issues. And 2 weeks ago, he and I both co-authored a book that just came out in print on the Five Eyes intelligence sharing relations. Also, over the last several years, we published together over half a dozen news articles on global security issues. The most recent was this morning in The Hill on Russia and its anti-satellite weapons systems and its pursuit of these. So I can't underscore enough the value of the Fulbright program and what it does. For those of you that are practitioners in the audience, not academics, I'm a Fulbright specialist. The Fulbright specialist program might be something you might be interested in. These are smaller projects that range from 2 weeks to 6 weeks in duration, and you will be on the roster for, it used to be 5 years, now it's 3 years. And these are excellent opportunities that you can take advantage of in basically cultivating these relationships and going overseas, getting the stipend, taking advantage of the airfare, and pursuing these opportunities. Likewise, if you're an academic, they're not mutually exclusive, so you can simultaneously submit your application for a Fulbright specialist while you're pursuing a Fulbright scholarship opportunity, and you can even do both in the same academic year. The last thing I'll close with is I've been a Fulbright peer reviewer for the political science category back in 2017. I was a standing peer reviewer for the Fulbright Specialist Program in the 2023 calendar year. I'm currently a Fulbright standing peer reviewer for this current calendar year. And one of the things I'll say is if you are going to put forward an application for the Fulbright program, look at the instructions because they're very specific in what they are looking for and how you need to answer and provide back what it is that you want to do. As a peer reviewer, they basically give us that. That is the criteria that we go through to evaluate your applications. So again, Roy, hey, I didn't mean to take too much time, but thanks for your opportunity to speak this morning.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Chang. Been in this country for 50 years. I was excited to hear your beginning comments, Brian, in terms of diversity, but I'm also disappointed that now time is running out, you didn't give me any answers. So it's really capacity building for our countries. I worry about my countries. It is my countries. I came from China, but this is my countries. So how can you really raise the next generations of Americans really having their love for the country, be able to contribute? So from the diverse background is what I'm talking about. I have staff, I have 60 languages in my agency. I run an immigrant and refugees service agency. So I see those potentials. I see that we are Americans and we need to be able to contribute and give back through program like this. Legacy program, Brian, your dad sent you to India. Roy, you sent your daughters to China. Wonderful. One is, Bishop, our brother and sister that have lived in the ghettos, be able to go to UMBC, college and so forth, encourage them to go into a program that can make a difference. So I think that the DEI, the question I have coming to this meeting that I did not get an answers, and $200-some million is my tax dollars. I need to hold you accountable to give us, the opportunity fairly and equitably, to all. So I'm just making this comment. And I wish I knew about this, right? 50 years a long time. My family came 1800, built a railroad, went back to China, flying tigers and all that. But even growing up, going to college 50 years ago. I'm in my 70s, 80s coming up. So, just so proud that we are American, but yet, we have so much relationship we need to do and build, looking the next generation. It worries me. It worries me about, not the same as the 60s, as the 70s when I first came, right? What Dr. King's told us. So it might not have anything to do with, say, Fulbright, but it has to do with building relationship, using the assets we have in this country, in our generation, in our kids, so that we can go overseas or have inbound students to build those relations with each other above all, it's one human race. Amen? Thank you.
I just wanted to also make a plug for the variety of programs that Fulbright offers. I do think, and maybe the panel can comment, that one does not have to be a college student to apply for the Fulbright program. So that's something to keep in mind. I realize it is difficult to learn about such programs, but I'm a 3-time recipient of Fulbrights, and I have just been, I'm a professor at Towson University, and I'm the primary applicant on an institutional grant, so I wanted for the Fulbright Scholar in Residence, and we're bringing a scholar. I'm not really allowed to say much about it yet, so I won't, but we're bringing a scholar from another part of the world next year, which will be exciting, and that's an opportunity for the diversity of the campus to benefit from, rather than an individual just heading out or an individual coming in. It's something that I think we can appreciate that Fulbright does, because it's an institutional grant and it affects, we have 20,000 students on our campus, and I hope many of them get to benefit.
So thank you so much. I should give you just a brief last word, because and I have to thank the audience for your excellent contributions.
So first, I will say that at least at UMBC, I work with alums. So if I have any of our alumni who have not enrolled in a degree-seeking program someplace else, I will happily work with you. But my last word is that, well, I'll tell you the story of the first student that I ever worked with. And he was an American Studies student at UMBC who he'd done a study abroad. It was like, I'm not really sure. I saw this thing down when I was in Argentina. I was like, yeah, well, you should probably do a Fulbright for that. So, and we worked very hard on this application together. And then he sent me a little email, a text message like, I think I got the Fulbright. It was before Fulbright's, the communication was quite as clear as it is now. So, and then he got it. So I actually read it. It was like, I think you got it. So we celebrated. It was great fun. And then he told his aunt. And the response that he got from her warms my heart to this day. It's like, oh, Jack, your life is going to be so different now. And it was. So he had an amazing experience in his time in Argentina, ended up doing research on that research that was helpful to get him into his master's program and then his doctoral program at the University of Chicago, where he got a PhD in anthropology. So to have played a role in that, it just makes my heart proud. So
I would close with 3 points. One is the transformational power of spending a lot of time overseas in a foreign culture, off the beaten path, getting to know real people and building up those friendships. I will tell you that for several years after I returned from India, if I was quiet for a little while, I could recall every day that I was in India. And for all of you who are part of this council and part of the Fulbright community, you know that power, and you know how important it is to your life and to the point that you made, the importance of sharing that with others. So that would be my second point, which is our responsibility as speaking for an older generation to inspire and enable young people of all kinds to have an international experience. And that we have to do that. My Fulbright Association has a series of community outreach programs, one called Fulbright in the Classroom, another our Youth Summit, where we are reaching out to underrepresented communities across America to make that point. And that's underrepresented covers a lot of ground, right? It can be African Americans from Atlanta, it can be rural kids from Iowa who are not as well represented within this program as they ought to be. We all need to work on this. We all need to inspire young people. We need to reassure them, just like Brian does every day, this is for you. You could do this. It's a little scary, sure, but it is worthwhile, and everyone should get the chance at this. And that leads me to my last point, which is that if the pie is small, that's very difficult to do. So that is one of the reasons why I would charge you with the next time you chat with your member of Congress to make a case for international exchange. So tomorrow, I'm going to Capitol Hill with colleagues from all over the country as part of the Alliance for International Exchange to make this very case. The Fulbright Association, we organize our own advocacy both at the grassroots level and in Washington, trying to educate members of Congress and sometimes the administration, yeah, I won't get into that, about the value of these kinds of exchanges. Why do we need them? They're an investment in our future, in our economy, in our culture, in our perspective on the world. If we're expecting the next generation to do this, we need to raise the money to get them to be able to do that. And your representatives on Capitol Hill can do that. They just need to hear your voice. So I thank you for inviting Brian and I this evening, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Brian. And thank you to the audience. Thanks so much.